Hello and welcome back to I Completed 80s Music with your chief idiot savant, me, the 80s mixtaper. Good in a pub quiz, that's what I always say. Today we dive into the back 6 tracks of Playlist 47 and complete September 1982. But before we do, another lovely person has very kindly bought me a coffee, or lots of coffees in fact, to support the show, and that person is the wonderful Nathan Cooper. Now, I happen to know Nathan a teeny bit. He is the man behind Kid Casio and the synth player and vocalist in the band The Modern. In both cases, do give Kid Casio and The Modern a listen on Spotify and Apple Music because their music is fantastic. And The Modern have been playing a few gigs recently, so do look out for future dates. I'd like to go and see them. Nathan is also the owner of the absolutely stunning Fiction Studios, which is this gorgeous boutique recording studio and was used for the Traitors Uncloaked recently. Again, well worth a look if you're wanting to hire some studio space in the future. Now, as per the Buy Me a Coffee agreement, I need to roast Nathan into an 80s situation, but we already know he's an incredible keyboard player. So I'm going to go totally the other way and say that the name Nathan Cooper, to me, I think Nathan was a really technical metal guitarist for like a new wave of British heavy metal band called something of the time like Steam Piston. And they'd be supporting AC/DC on tour. And once AC/DC had recorded Back in Black, they'd told Steam Piston about Compass Point Studios in Nassau. So Nathan and the band flew out there to record their debut album, but here's the catch. Nathan never went home. Sly and Robbie found out he was incredible on the mixing desk, and Nathan loved the vibe and the Caribbean life so much that he became Compass Point's secret weapon. And so he had to say to, I don't know, Mick, Don and Lovey from Steam Piston, these are all totally made up by the way, sorry lads, I think I'm going to have to make a new life out here. And he went on to be an unsung engineer for Dire Straits, Talking Heads, Madness and the B-52s. How about that? That's pretty good, isn't it? So there you go, totally made up backstories by yours truly. And if you would like your name roasted on the pod and to support my endeavours, do please buy me a coffee on my Buy Me a Coffee link in the episode description. And if you like the podcast, please do obviously tickle the subscribe button and leave a review. Back to today, on the latter half of Playlist 47, we have two bands almost ready to call it a day in the Jam and the Clash. Peter Gabriel makes his first appearance in over 2 years, but proves he's got the production chops when it comes to synth music. Ultravox go pop with a Beatles producer. We finally say goodbye to those pioneers Roxy music, and we end with a special bit of reggae. As usual, we can't play the songs on the pod due to copyright laws, but to remedy this situation, you will find playlists for both Spotify and Apple Music in the episode description, plus a full track listing if those playlist hyperlinks should fail on your pod platform of choice. I think they work on the large majority though. So are you hungry for more music? Then let's dive back into September 1982. We start our show today with one of two moments when very successful bands begin to fracture. When we last crossed paths with Woking's Finest Export in February 1982, the Jam hit number one with the bass-driven, Motown-infused brilliance of A Town Called Malice. It was a track that somehow managed to make a bleak look at Thatcher's Britain sound like you're skipping down the road to the greatest mod party on earth. But the problem with reaching the summit is the feeling that you've done it and there's nothing left of value to give. And in Paul Weller's case, he was looking for an exit. By late summer of 1982, the trio consisting of Weller, bassist Bruce Foxton and drummer Rick Buckler was privately fracturing. Weller was suffocating under the commercial weight and expectations of being the defining voice of a generation, a mod revivalist, straitjacket he desperately wanted to do away with. He wanted strings, he wanted brass, and he wanted absolute creative freedom. This brings us to their next musical offering. It was a massive departure from their early three-chord punk roots, replacing aggressive guitar stabs with a dramatic orchestral sweep. It was lush, melancholic, and deeply cinematic. Let's drop the needle on the penultimate single from one of the greatest British bands ever to do it. Here is the majestic, heartbreaking track released in September 1982, The Bitterest Pill, Track 8, Playlist 47. The title of The Bitterest Pill is perhaps apt, as it's by a band preparing to say goodbye, but also because the lyrical content kind of exactly highlights what's going on. The song is about losing a love to someone else, and in Weller's case, well, his head was being turned. Behind the scenes, the internal tension within the group was terminal. Although the public remained entirely unaware of the storm brewing, Paul Weller had already made up his mind to break up the band. He had secretly communicated his decision to his bandmates before making it public, creating an atmosphere of profound uncertainty during the final months of their existence. The track was recorded at the prestigious Air Studios in London. Stylistically, it was an incredibly anomalous song for the Jam. Instead of looking to the Who or standard rhythm and blues as structural template points, Weller looked towards the grandiose soul pop arrangements of the Walker Brothers, smothering the track in luxurious sweeping strings. The song also featured prominent backing vocals from Jenny Mathias, the lead singer of the all-girl new wave band the Bell Stars. Her rich harmonies provided a stark contrast to Weller's wounded lead vocals, creating a camped-up but deeply affecting evocation of romantic heartbreak. The visual presentation of the single even featured a unique pop footnote. The handsome man featured on the front cover artwork is actually singer Vaughn Toulouse from the new wave group Department S, a band we met only once in episode 22 in 1981. This design choice further detached the track from the traditional branding of the group, hinting at the visual aesthetics Weller would later deploy with his next musical venture, the Stull Council. But, as I've said many times before, we're not there yet. The single was officially unleashed on the British public via Polydor Records. It climbed all the way to a peak position of number 2 on the UK charts. However, it stalled right there, locked out of the coveted top spot for 2 consecutive weeks. The musical culprits keeping Weller from his 5th number 1 were the stadium rock anthem Eye of the Tiger by Survivor, and the youthful reggae pop sensation Past the Dutchie by Musical Youth, which we'll meet at the end of this episode. The title itself was a bit of an ironic prophecy for the thousands of dedicated fans across the country. On the 30th of October 1982, Weller formally announced that he was disbanding the Jam. He wanted to explore what he could do outside the rigid constraints of a traditional 3-piece power pop group. Foxton and Buckler were reportedly stunned by the swiftness of the announcement, having spent months hoping Weller might change his mind and continue the musical partnership. Ultimately, the title of this glorious soul ballad became the very reality their massive fan base had to digest. It was truly the bitterest pill they had to swallow. For track 9, one of my favourites from 1982, and it might be one which is new to you. Imagine a timeline where pop music isn't a series of smooth graduations, but a sequence of violent, beautifully engineered mutations. We're sitting in 1982. If you turn on the radio, synth pop is everywhere. The Human League is telling you they don't want you, baby. They sang about a waitress in a cocktail bar. Soft Cell is singing about tainted love. Those bands were brilliant, but their synthesizers felt intentionally cold, rigid, and strictly sequenced. Those machines were a shiny new coat of plastic paint over traditional pop structures. Then comes a song that sounds like it dropped from an entirely different orbit. A track that feels breathy, sweaty, terrified and jagged. It sounds more modern than its peers by a margin of several years, more late 80s than early 80s. It has a beat that drops like an anvil and a hook built out of digitised clay, shaping the track into an entirely new type of song. But the man behind it is of course a mad genius. When we last left our protagonist in 1980, he was a man willfully dismantling his own past. Peter Gabriel had scored a hit with the complex and politically tasty song Games Without Frontiers from his 3rd album, known to fans as Melt. That was the album where he famously banned his drummer Jerry Marotta from using cymbals. He forced the music to find its momentum purely through the mid-range thud of tom-toms and a brand new studio accident called the gated reverb. But Gabriel wasn't content to rest on a hit. He didn't want to repeat the formula. He wanted a complete evolution. He decamped to his personal home studio workspace at Ashcombe House near Bath to record his fourth album, which would be released in September 1982 and titled Security for his North American audience. Here, he built songs from the beat up, treating the studio like a laboratory. He began a methodical process of collecting rhythms, carrying around a literal suitcase full of cassette tapes filled with interesting beats and global music traditions. For Gabriel, rhythm was the spine of the entire piece. And that brings us to the next song on our list. This is the utterly brilliant Shock the Monkey. Track 9, if you've got good headphones or a great stereo, this one is a must. Shock the Monkey was released as a single on the 10th of September 1982. It became Gabriel's first top 40 hit in the US, peaking at number 29 on the Billboard Hot 100 and reaching number 1 on the Billboard Hot Mainstream Rock Tracks chart. But the UK wasn't ready for it yet, where it only peaked at number 58. The reason Shock the Monkey sounds so staggeringly advanced compared to the other synth tracks of 1982 comes down to the specific tools Gabriel and his co-producer David Lord brought into Ashcombe House. Gabriel was using the Fairlight CMI, the Fairlight computer musical instrument. As mentioned on previous episodes, this was an incredibly primitive, wildly expensive Australian digital synthesizer and sampler. Now here's the interesting part to it, because obviously it's something that we've talked about before. While other bands were using synthesizers to make standard keyboard lines, Gabriel used the Fairlight to record real-world organic sounds, manipulate them and sequence them into actual rhythm tracks. The rhythm of Shock the Monkey is anchored by a Lin LM1 drum computer, programmed by Gabriel himself. But the human element remains vital. Jerry Marotta played acoustic drums to match those electronic patterns, strictly avoiding cymbals once again, and substituting a Brazilian surdo drum instead of a traditional kick drum. Tony Levin laid down a fluid locked-in bass line using a Chapman stick, while Larry Fast added textures on a Prophet 5 synthesizer. The iconic stabbing hook of the song isn't a stock keyboard preset, it's a meticulously crafted digital sample manipulated inside the Fairlight. Because of the title and the disturbing surreal music video directed by Brian Grant, which featured Gabriel in a business suit and white face paint alongside footage of a monkey, the song was widely misunderstood. Listeners frequently mistook it as a protest against animal testing or a song about shock therapy. However, Gabriel has been entirely explicit about the track's true meaning. In interviews, he stated that Shock the Monkey is actually a love song of all things. It is a psychological examination of jealousy and how that specific emotion can trigger a person's most basic primal animalistic instincts within a relationship. The monkey is not a literal animal being tortured. The monkey is a metaphor for an individual's inner anxieties and raw feelings of jealousy. Gabriel initially argued against releasing the track as the lead single because he felt it didn't fully represent the more contemplative nature of the rest of the album. Yet the record company prevailed. The song's relentless funk-infused rhythm and repetitive urgent backing vocals, anchored by guest vocalist Peter Hamill, created an avant-garde masterpiece that somehow doubled as a commercial breakthrough. It proved that Gabriel would be an innovator in the decade ahead, but it would be 4 more years before he'd break down the visual wall too, with a certain song called Sledgehammer. For track 10, the second of our 2 bands on the verge of fracturing. When we last crossed paths with West London's finest, The Clash, it was 1982. We were dodging artillery shells and grooving to the global dance punk hybrid of Rock the Casbah. That track was a massive transatlantic success, but behind the scenes, the wheels were completely coming off the bandwagon. Drummer Topper Headon was unceremoniously ousted from the group due to his escalating heroin addiction, right as the album Combat Rock hit the shelves in May 1982. Meanwhile, guitarist Mick Jones and frontman Joe Strummer were locked in a cold war of creative and personal differences. Yet out of this toxic pressure cooker came a track built around a heavy garage rock riff that felt less like a sophisticated political manifesto, which for The Clash was a big shock, and more like a punk breakup song, possibly aimed at the band itself. It became a permanent fixture of rock radio and a staple for future television soundtracks. Let's drop the needle on the second single from Combat Rock, released on the 20th of September 1982. Written by Mick Jones, who also steps up to handle the lead vocals. This is Should I Stay or Should I Go? Now, if you look at the timeline of The Clash, it is incredibly tempting to view Should I Stay or Should I Go as Mick Jones's explicit, passive-aggressive musical exit interview. The internal narrative is perfect. Mick writes a song titled Should I Stay or Should I Go in 1981, and by September 1983, Joe Strummer and Paul Simonon officially fire him from the band. It feels like the ultimate prophetic punk rock text. However, we do not speculate or bend the facts on this podcast, or at least we try not to. Mick Jones himself went on the record in 1991 to flatly deny this theory, stating to the NME it wasn't about anybody specific and it wasn't preempting my leaving The Clash, it was just a good rocking song, our attempt at writing a classic. Rumours also swirled that it was about his highly tempestuous relationship with American singer Ellen Foley, but Jones maintains it was simply a piece of pure high-octane studio energy. Speaking of the studio, the magic of this track lies in its glorious, chaotic spontaneity. While tracking the song, Joe Strummer suddenly decided on the spur of the moment that the backing vocals needed to be shouted in Spanish. They needed a translator, so their tape operator, Eddie Garcia, called his mother over the phone all the way in Brooklyn Heights. Strummer shouted the English lyrics down the line, and Garcia's mother translated them into Spanish on the fly. Because Eddie and his mother were Ecuadorian, Joe Strummer and guest vocalist Joe Eli ended up screaming their responses in Ecuadorian Spanish. Joe Eli later admitted to Music Radar that his own contributions were heavily mixed with Tex-Mex dialect, making the translation delightfully non-verbatim and whimsical. When you hear Mick Jones shout "split" right before that final frantic verse, that wasn't a warning about the band breaking up either. It was just classic raw garage band showmanship. But the truly bizarre twist in the tale is its commercial trajectory. When originally released in September 1982, the double A-side single performed modestly by their newfound standards. It peaked at number 17 in the UK and stalled out at number 45 on the US Billboard Hot 100. But then the 90s arrived. In early 1991, the clothing giant Levi's approached the now defunct Clash to use Should I Stay or Should I Go for a television commercial targeted at British audiences. Historically, the Clash had largely rejected corporate advertising requests, turning down lucrative offers from British Telecom and Dr Pepper to protect their counterculture integrity. However, they left this specific decision up to the song's primary author, Mick Jones. Jones approved the commercial, reasoning that Levi's jeans were intrinsically woven into the historic fabric of rock and roll culture, meaning there was no moral ground to object. The commercial was a massive success, sparking a wave of nostalgia. Reissued in February 1991, nearly a decade after it was recorded, Should I Stay or Should I Go rocketed straight to number 1 on the UK singles chart on March the 3rd, 1991. Ironically, they secured their only ever UK number 1 single 5 years after they had officially ceased to exist. Mick Jones even used the single release to bundle in the track Rush by his new band Big Audio Dynamite 2, proving that punk idealism never entirely kills off a sharp eye for marketing. We'll meet the Clash one last time in 1985. And now back to some synth pop. We last left the British new wave pioneers Ultravox in May 1981, back in episode 25. It seems a while ago. They were riding high on the stark, industrial yet danceable rhythms of All Stood Still, the fourth and final single from their landmark Vienna album. It was a time when mid-year Billy Currie, Chris Cross and Warren Cann were successfully redefining synth pop with an icy Teutonic edge under the guidance of legendary German producer Conny Plank. They had built a massive brooding monument of electronic sound that dominated European airwaves. But synth pop in the early 1980s moved at terminal velocity. By 1982, the band felt an urgent need to break away from their own architectural constraints, to strip back the dense experimental textures of their previous work, and to pursue a brighter, punchier, and altogether more traditional, indie-oriented direction. They wanted to see if their synth-driven epics could survive the pristine gloss of a legendary pop architect. So, Ultravox left the cold studios of Germany behind. They packed up their synths, their drum machines, and their dramatic vocal stylings, and they flew across the Atlantic. They placed their sonic future into the hands of Sir George Martin, yes, the man who shaped the Beatles, and set to work in his idyllic air studios on the Caribbean island of Montserrat, as well as their base in London. The very first taste of this dramatic evolution arrived in mid-September 1982. It was a track that managed to be simultaneously soaring, deeply melancholic, but quite poppy at the same time. It combined standard acoustic drumming with bright synth brass sweeps, delivering a lyric obsessed with the passing of time, fading memories, and the inevitable desolation left in the wake of human conflict. This is Reap the Wild Wind, track 11. Reap the Wild Wind was released by Chrysalis Records on the 17th of September 1982. It served as the lead single for Ultravox's sixth studio album, Quartet. The decision to hire George Martin as their producer was a deliberate shift. After 3 consecutive albums with Connie Plank, interviews from the era noted that the band felt their relationship with Plank was getting a bit too safe, and they wanted to inject new incitement into the recording process. Martin famously agreed to produce the record because his daughter was a massive fan of the band. The sonic landscape of Reap the Wild Wind reflects Martin's cleaner, neater and more polished approach to pop production. Unlike the dark, expansive arrangements of Vienna or Rage in Eden, this track is tight, punchy and structurally direct. The track is underpinned by Warren Cann's steady acoustic drum patterns rather than a heavily treated electronic beat. Midgear's vocals soar over the top, delivering lines like "A finger points to show a scene," "Another face where mine had been," and a chorus that captures a bittersweet transactional relationship. "You take my hand and you give me your friendship. I'll take my time and send you my slow reply." And his delivery speeds up for the chorus, giving it quite a poppy edge. The title itself operates as a literary and historical nod, playing on the Old Testament biblical verse from Hosea 8:7. They sow the wind and reap the whirlwind. This theme of actions yielding destructive consequences perfectly tied into the song's striking music video. Co-directed by Midgear and bassist Chris Cross, the cinematic video features the band members playing dual roles. They portray World War I and World War II Air Force pilots alongside modern-day workers constructing a physical war monument. The monument's design intentionally mirrored the geometric architecture seen on Peter Saville's Quartet album cover. The video stands as a poignant, explicit dedication to those who served in the armed forces. Good video, by the way. Go look for it on YouTube. Commercially, the single was a major success, entering the UK singles chart and peaking at number 12. It also holds a unique place in the band's discography as amazingly the only Ultravox single ever to chart on the US Billboard Hot 100, reaching number 71. The track successfully laid the groundwork for Quartet, which would go on to spawn 3 more UK top 20 hits: Him, Visions in Blue and We Came to Dance, and solidify this lighter, rockier era as the band's biggest international commercial triumph. Him and Visions in Blue will definitely feature on this pod. For our penultimate track, it's time to put a bow on one of the most influential bands in terms of building the foundations of this thing we call the 80s. When you read any biography or historical account of this early 80s period and ask the question to the Blitz kids, who were your influences? 2 names always come up: David Bowie and of course the wonderful Roxy music. Imagine it's September 1982, you walk into a record shop and pick up a 7-inch vinyl with a green sleeve. The band reads Roxy music. The title says, "Take a chance with me." You don't know it yet, but this is the end of the line, the final single the band will ever release. Just a few months earlier, on May the 28th, 1982, they gave us Avalon, an album that spent 3 weeks at number 1 on the UK Albums Chart. We already witnessed the title track, and more than this, floating through the airwaves that summer. But as autumn approached, Brian Ferry, Phil Manzanera and Andy McKay decided to leave us with one last plea for devotion. Let's listen. Let's now dive into how an instrumental track from 1978 became Roxy Music's curtain call, and how Roxy became the ultimate DNA donor to the synth pop and new romantic revolution that built the early 80s. So 1978, Roxy Music was on a temporary hiatus, and lead guitarist Phil Manzanera released his second solo studio album called K-Scope. Tucked inside that track list was a specific instrumental track titled Numbers, co-written with John Wetton. Manzanera didn't know it then, but that melodic sequence would become the structural spine of Roxy's final single. When the core trio reconvened at Compass Point Studios in Nassau, Bahamas to record Avalon, Ferry heard the potential. He added lyrics, turning it into a vulnerable narrative about a protagonist who was grown entirely exhausted by short-lived, non-committal love affairs. Reviewer Kurt Loder explicitly described the song's opening as an extended pointillistic intro that opens into an airy, yearning romance in a 1982 review published by Rolling Stone. For the first 45 seconds, you are trapped in a slow-building atmospheric soundscape. The synthesizers hiss like steam out of a subway grate. Then suddenly, the clouds part, the rhythm track snaps into place, and Ferry delivers a smooth, emotive performance. It reached number 26 on the UK singles chart in the autumn of 1982. Not their best hit by far, but the true importance of Take a Chance with Me lies in what it says about Roxy Music's staggering legacy. By the time Avalon arrived, a whole new generation of musicians had conquered the charts. In London, in the early 80s, these young subcultural pioneers called the Blitz Kids were gathering at the Tuesday club nights of Covent Garden's Blitz Club. This group directly launched the new romantic movement. If you look closely at the makeup, the asymmetrical hair and the style of bands like Spandau Ballet, Visage and Ultravox, you were looking at people who treated Roxy Music as a holy text. As documented by The Guardian, when Roxy Music dropped their 1979 comeback track Trash, it peaked at a modest number 40 in the UK, but at the Blitz it became a kind of set text. The Blitz Kids did not want the aggressive grime of punk. In fact, often they had been the first to embrace punk and the first to move away from it. They wanted the high art glamour, the electronic textures and the calculated sophistication that Roxy pioneered in the 1970s. Take a Chance with Me is the absolute intersection of art rock and romantic pop. The shifting synthesizer washes and immaculate production did not just reflect the era, they taught synth pop how to grow up. In his review for AllMusic, Stephen Thomas Elwine pointed out that the Avalon record effectively functioned as the maturation of synth pop by mixing high-gloss electronics with a deep, adult-oriented melancholy. When you listen to the synthetic architecture of Avalon, you can draw a direct line to the high-gloss pop of Duran Duran, whose bassist John Taylor noted that seeing Roxy in the 1970s made him say, "That's what I want to do." Roxy Music started the 1970s as weirdo art rockers and ended it by designing the blueprint of sophistopop. They walked away at the absolute peak of their commercial and stylistic powers. We end today with an incredibly specific memory, one of those memories. It's September 1982, or at least I think it is. As a 4-year-old boy, I've just had a lovely morning at play school in St William's Church in Walderslade, Kent. I'd probably been whizzing around on a trike or building stuff out of stickle bricks, with a glass of whole milk to calm us all down before our parents collected us. Mum collects me, we walk back down Prince's Avenue, back home, and then she plonks me in front of the telly for lunch. I have a bowl of oxtail soup, my favourite at the time, and a slice of bread and butter. The BBC's lunchtime magazine show was on, the legendary but long defunct Pebble Mill at 1, shot live from Birmingham. On the show that day was a group of kids and teenagers doing reggae. I'm not sure at that age I'd ever heard anything like it, but like the rest of the nation, this group and this song totally captured my imagination. The group is Musical Youth, and the song, of course, is Pass the Dutchie. Track 13, our final song on playlist 47. Good grief, that song takes me back. Of all the singles of the 80s, that's the one where I can literally tell you where I first heard it. Pass the Dutchie, a track released on the 17th of September 1982 by MCA Records that went on to sell more than 5 million copies globally. It remains one of the defining mainstream reggae pop crossover hits ever, not just of the decade. Let's jump in the time machine and travel back to 1979 in Birmingham, England. The band was formed by pupils attending Duddeston Manor School in the West Midlands. The group initially featured 2 pairs of brothers, Kelvin and Michael Grant, alongside Patrick and Frederick Waite Jr. The early driving force was Frederick Waite Sr., the father of the Waite brothers. He had deep musical roots as a former member of the successful 1960s Jamaican vocal rocksteady group, The Techniques. In the band's earliest days, Waite Sr. fronted the group as a co-lead vocalist. He guided the boys through live performances in local Birmingham pubs. When they formed, the members aged ranged from 7 to 15, with guitarist Kelvin Grant being the youngest of the group. The young band quickly caught the attention of the independent music industry. They recorded and released a double A-side single featuring the tracks Generals and Political on a local independent label called 021 Records in 1981. This release directly helped them secure an influential live session on John Peel's BBC Radio 1 evening show. The radio broadcast provided crucial early national exposure to a wider audience. However, achieving major commercial success required a distinct youth-focused image. The group needed a younger frontman to match the energetic musicianship of the backing band. Enter 15-year-old schoolmate Dennis Seaton, who officially took over lead vocal duties, while Frederick Waite Sr. stepped back into a management role. With Seaton on board, the final 5-piece lineup was firmly locked in. The group subsequently signed a major record deal with MCA Records, setting the stage for their breakthrough debut studio album, The Youth of Today. Now, let's clear up the song's long-standing misconception about what is actually being passed around in this song. Frontman Dennis Seaton explicitly clarified the matter in an interview with the San Francisco Examiner, stating Pass the Dutchie has always been about passing a cooking pot. The hit track was a heavily modified adaptation of a 1981 Jamaican reggae track titled Pass the Cutchie, originally recorded by the vocal group The Mighty Diamonds. In Jamaican patois, the cutchie explicitly refers to a traditional clay pipe used for smoking cannabis. Because the members of Musical Youth were minors, ranging in age from 11 to 16 at the time of the recording, singing about illicit substances on mainstream radio or television was impossible. The production and songwriting team, led by producer Tony Owens, recognised the immediate need for a family-friendly lyrical rewrite. They swapped the word cutchie for Dutchie, which is a Dutch oven, a heavy cast-iron cooking pot used to prepare large family stews. The lyrical edits did not stop at the title. The Mighty Diamonds' original line, "How does it feel when you got no herb?" was transformed into the far more socially conscious query, "How does it feel when you got no food?" The narrative focus shifted from a smoke session to economic hardship and shared food. Even the iconic lyric, "Pass the Dutchie" on the left-hand side took on a double meaning. While Rastafarian smoking etiquette traditionally dictates passing a pipe to the left, switching the object to a cooking pot turned the phrase into a playful subversion of formal British dining etiquette where food dishes are traditionally passed clockwise to the right. The clever lyrical adjustment worked perfectly. Pass the Dutchie debuted at number 26 on the UK singles chart and rocketed to number 1 the following week in October 1982. Its success quickly spread internationally, topping the charts in at least 8 other countries, including Australia, Canada, New Zealand and Ireland. The song's cultural impact was further amplified by its music video, which was shot on location around London. It became one of the earliest music videos featuring an all-black group to enter regular broadcast rotation on MTV. This landmark broadcast milestone occurred months before Michael Jackson's Billie Jean video debuted on the network in March 1983, helping break early racial barriers on the music channel. This high-profile television exposure helped propel the single into the top 10 of the US Billboard Hot 100, peaking at number 10 in February 1983. It earned the young band a Grammy Award nomination for Best New Artist at the 26th Annual Grammy Awards in 1984. The track remains a definitive reggae pop crossover, enjoying a massive modern streaming resurgence after being featured in Season 4 of Netflix's sci-fi series Stranger Things. But in 1982, there was nothing stranger than a group of kids topping the charts with what would become a reggae anthem. Blimey, if I had the chance to rewind my life and go back to a specific moment to start again, I guess that moment in 1982 with Pass the Dutchie, a bowl of oxtail soup and some bread and butter might be it. I've got very happy memories of growing up in that period. Simpler times, I guess. I digress. So, Playlist 47 had the introduction of Culture Club. Well, Playlist 48 also does not disappoint. Next week, we travel to Bath and introduce some of the most well-crafted music of the decade, courtesy of a little band called Tears for Fears. The Pretenders return to form, Air Supply release another killer ballad, Spandau Ballet enter their suit and tie era, the kids from Fame make one last appearance, Dexy's Midnight Runners have another beautiful tune up their sleeve, and we end the episode by donning our spandex and headbands to discover where Eric Pryd's 2004 hit came from, courtesy of 1982 and Steve Winwood. And then the week after, we finally meet George Michael and Wham. Exciting times, folks. Until then, have a wonderful week, enjoy the songs, and we'll see you next time on I Completed 80s Music. Take care.